Many thanks for joining and many thanks for being here. I'll be starting our series of webinar sessions, and I'd like to start talking about ants, a subject that you probably don't hear about so often. And first of all, I'd like to start with a question that I've been hearing often for the past year, which is, why do you study ants? Why are they interesting? Why should we care? Why should anyone care about ants? And I'd like to start by saying that I think that ants are inherently interesting. Ask any kid aged 5 to 10, they'll tell you that ants are cool. And jokes aside, I think that there is a point in everyone's life that we have been standing near an ant nest or watching at a long row of ants and admiring how strong they are and how their teamwork gets the job done. And what's interesting about them is also that, did you know there are around 15,000 species of ants around the world? That's more than all the mammals in the world. That's more than all the birds around the world. And also scientists have estimated that in some ecosystems, ants make up around 15 to 20% of living biomass. That is a very high percentage. And perhaps the most interesting thing about them is that they are often labeled as ecosystem engineers. And the term engineer implies that they create new habitats or they maintain existing ones by changing the landscape around them, the same way as we do. And the way they do this is by creating their tunnels and nests. And these very complex networks of nests actually create air and water pockets under the soil. The water can be used by plants so that they grow, and the air is used by other subterranean organisms for them to breathe. So ants help sustain the biodiversity around them. And they are also the janitors of our ecosystems. You've often seen them moving around seeds or other dead insects, and they move these inside and outside their nests. They cut them in small pieces, and so they help make them more available to decomposers, that is bacteria and fungi, and in their way, they're supporting and helping nutrient cycling. They are also important links in various food chains. They are eaten by a lot of stuff, and they do eat a lot of other insects and organisms. Remove ants from any ecosystem, and it will start dying. But most of us know ants from photographs such as this. Well, they are common household pests, and we get to share our shelter and food with them. Most times we don't want that, and they are quite bad roommates as they won't ask for permission to take our stuff. And no, I wouldn't like to finish off that donut. Thank you for the invitation, but no thanks. They often excavate nests in crevices in our tiles or in our walls, but they do not create these problems. They just find a small crevice in your wall and they'll make it bigger. So although they are not to blame for the problem, they make it bigger. And that is especially a problem when they decide to nest in an electrical socket. We haven't seen a lot of that going around, but if you have, please do come in contact with us and would be very interested in looking at what kind of ants they are. So we see that ants can also become a safety risk and can be potentially dangerous to our health. This happens with some ants biting or stinging us, and some people who are allergic may face an allergic reaction. There are also some invasive species that may cause problems, but we'll talk more about them later on. So for all these reasons, it's important to monitor ant biodiversity, their distribution, spread, where they are found around the island, how they reproduce, and what time of the year they are active. And with that in mind, let's talk more about Cyprus. We are the third largest island in the Mediterranean, and the island is approximately 10 million years old. that was the time that the island appeared out of the blue in the middle of the sea, and it has retained this shape for approximately 3 million years. Naturally, every species that can be found on the island has somehow got to this island, either by naturally dispersing from a neighboring region, such as Turkey or the Middle East, or with the help of humans. We have been very good at transporting plants and animals around in the area, as Cyprus has been inhabited for the past 10 to 12,000 years and has been an important trading center for the last millennia. Cyprus, as part of the Mediterranean, is a biodiversity hotspot, meaning that it hosts a large number of species, many of which are endemic and only found on Cyprus. And in the case of ants, it has been shown that the island is an important rarity center, meaning it has lots of rare species of ants. And let's destroy this beautiful picture by adding some numbers to it. So this you will find if you check the Ant Maps website. It's actually a very cool website. And for each region, you can find the number of different species and which these are. So a checklist for each region. For Cyprus, we know of 65 native species and 10 alien or non-native. We have checked the available scientific literature and built this nice bar plot you see on the left-hand side. So we know that the first species for Cyprus were reported around 1.5 centuries ago. That's a long time. And for the 19th and 20th century, not a lot was going around. Although there were new species described or mentioned for Cyprus, the information we have is pretty general, like species are mentioned as found on the island as a whole, or some regions such as Limassol and Larnaca with not a lot of information on specific habitats or what do they do. That was until 21st century when you see that has been a spike in the number of publications, which we are trying to contribute to. And with this preliminary information, we have identified some knowledge gaps. First of all, how many species of ants do we have on Cyprus and which are they? Second, where can we find these species on a map? Third, what kind of habitats do they use? Are they generalists, meaning they can be found anywhere on the island? Or are they specialists? Do they require some kind of special habitat, such as a pine forest or a high mountain peak? Do they like low or high temperatures? Do they need a lot of water or not? What's more, it's important to establish what's the relationship with other organisms, with other insects, birds, and plants. And in terms of conservation, do we have endemic species that have to be protected? What are the threats they are facing and what can we do to help? Lastly, in the case of invasive alien species, what are their impacts on native biodiversity and humans? And are there species that are dangerous? Should we eradicate them and how? So these are all questions that we have been trying to answer for the past year in the context of my PhD studies, as well as a Darwin Plus fellowship in order to study the biodiversity and patterns of spread of ants in the Akrotiri Peninsula. And boy, it has been a very busy year. We've found plenty of new species to science, which are endemic and can only be found on Cyprus. We have found new records of species, native and non-native, and we have made some changes to the existing checklists of species for the island. And for all these species, we also try to find something more, something about their way of life and the places they can be found. So we have tried to put all of this information in a website, the Ants of Cyprus website, which you can visit, and it's available online. You can scan the QR on your right-hand side, and in there you'll find lots of information about what's new regarding the Ants of Cyprus, species profiles, where you can find maps and photographs for each species, about alien species, how we have built this website, what's the team behind this initiative, as well as educational material and other kind of media that you can click through and find out more about ants. And to give you some behind the scenes action, this is the latest checklist of alien species, ant species on Cyprus. We know of 91 species in total. This information is not all readily available in the website yet, as we're trying to publish our findings, and these have to be peer reviewed by other scientists also. But first of all, you see that the number of species has risen. Although we believe that 91 species is certainly an underestimate. And how we know that is, first of all, because we haven't sampled the whole island. And second, from something called island biogeography and its principles. According to island biogeography, the larger the area of an island, the larger the number of species it holds. And we can do some comparisons with neighboring Crete. Crete is smaller in area than Cyprus, but already hosts more than 100 species. So Cyprus, as larger, should have more species. And what's more, it's interesting to see the numbers of these two parts of the pie chart, the number of endemic species and the number of alien species. In both categories, there are 17 species, which is around 20% of Cyprus's ant fauna. The number of endemic species sure shows us that Cyprus is an important biodiversity hotspot and hosts some rare species that cannot be found anywhere else in the world. The number of alien species now is kind of alarming, but it gives us a chance to let you know more about alien species. And let's go to alien species 101 class. Some terminology. Well, aliens or exotic or non-native species are those that have been introduced to a new area where they previously were not existent, and that has happened through human activity, meaning the movement of people or trade. These species may have reached our island through boats and aeroplanes, in people's luggage, in food that we have imported, in plants, containers, and other means. There are currently 14,000 species in Europe which are not alien to the region, are not native to the region, I'm sorry. And although not all of these have some negative impact, there is a subset of them that can harm human health, the economy, as well as native biodiversity. This subset of alien species is labeled as invasive alien species. And invasive alien species are one of the main threats to global biodiversity loss. So it's very important to study them and monitor them. These are the 17 alien ants of Cyprus. You can see these beautiful photographs, and although the number is quite large, we know that not all of them are particularly dangerous. Only a handful of these are. But our latest publication can give you some indications of general trends. First of all, the number of species is quite high. 17 species is a lot, and this number is expected to even rise more. What's more, 90% of the records we have are from urban areas or agricultural land. Nevertheless, some species have been found in protected areas, such as the Natura 2000 network. These species can be predominantly found in the lowlands below 500 meters of altitude, and they have been introduced to Cyprus and spread mostly through potted plants, meaning plants in pots have been imported, ants nest in that soil, and the contaminated material is then dispersed to hotel gardens and parks. The problem is that the impacts of these species are mostly unknown, and it's something that we should really start researching more. And one of the most dangerous species around is the little fire ant, or the electric ant, Vasmania orbunctata. This is a very tiny species, around 1 to 1.5 millimeters long, and it has earned its spot in the list of one of the world's 100 worst invasive alien species. It is also mentioned in a list of invasive alien species of EU concern, which means that there is legislation that says that once this species has been found within the EU, each country member has to establish a monitoring scheme and try to eradicate the species. And why is that? It's because this species is quite dangerous. It has earned its stripes. It's very dangerous to human health because it has a sting. This sting can inject venom. And although not all people have a bad reaction with this venom, there have been cases around the world where people have been hospitalized with anaphylactic shocks. Also, domestic cats and dogs are not safe from it. And in some islands, the locals have reported that local cats and dogs have gone blind because they have been bitten around the eyes or inside their eyes. Regarding native biodiversity, wherever this ant goes, it eliminates all native species, and it has been found to feed on small turtles and reptiles which have just hatched outside their eggs. The eradication of this species is very costly and very hard around the world. In Cyprus, to eliminate this species, we'll have to spend millions. However, its impacts around the world already cost us billions of euros annually. However, we're trying to monitor the distribution and the impact of this species. And in the website of the Ants of Cyprus, you can find more educational material on how to identify the species and some measures you can take so that you don't help it spread even more. If you believe that you have found the species, you can always contact us, and we would be very happy to see any material you could collect for us. And with that, I'd like to thank you everyone for your attention and the time you have given me. I would like to thank the team behind the research of the Ants of Cyprus, and of course, all their institutions for supporting us. Special thanks to the Biodiversity Challenge Funds and Darwin Plush Initiative for funding our work, and of course, for Enalia Physis for giving the opportunity to talk about our work on the subject. Thank you very much, everyone, and I'm ready to answer any questions.
I want to ask you how many species of these non-native species we identified are considered invasive. I know you mentioned the little fire ants, but have you identified any other that are invasive species?
Okay, so I'd like to say that the total number was 17, but this number is expected to rise as people move around more and more and we import more and more stuff. There's a bigger chance that these kind of species are not detected during border controls. However, from these species, we have identified 5 species that are potentially invasive. One was the little fire ant, and another one which should be important is the destroyer ant, Trichomyrmex destructor. And what is interesting in that species is that it is attracted by electromagnetic fields. So this is the ant that we will probably find nesting in our sockets inside houses or other electrical equipment. So not only there is an economic loss to the destruction of wires, but it also may be potentially, but for human health, a human health risk. And another 2 species are found to hybridize with native species, but we don't know this happening in Cyprus. And lastly, there is the black crazy ant, which has been found around the world in hospitals transmitting diseases. Actually, it's not a vector of diseases, but some viruses and bacteria can be carried on its body. And if it's infested and enters a kitchen, this could get to the food of patients.
Thank you. Very, very, very interesting argument. Thank you. And my final question is 2 questions, but can go together. So this is one question that you asked, and I think it's one of your questions of your PhD. do ants have preferred habitats? And the second question is how climate change is affecting their microhabitats, increase in sediment temperature, lack of vegetation, lack of rainwater.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's very interesting. We haven't been checking into climate change a lot, but it's certainly a very interesting and hot topic in research. What we see in Cyprus that, of course, there are species that are not expected to face any problems with climate change because they prefer arid environments. So high temperatures and low humidity are okay with them. So these kinds of species are expected to reach higher altitudes as climate change advances. But on the other hand, we also have found some species that can be only found in the Troodos mountain area. So they prefer higher humidity and a denser coverage of trees, such as pine forests and cedar forests. We've even found species which are endemic in the peak of Mount Hionistra in 1,900 meters high. So these are the species that will face problems with climate change. As temperatures rise, they'll have to go higher and higher. And after a certain point, their populations will collapse. So that is certainly something we have to look into more. But at the same time, you give me the opportunity to say that none of the ant species in Cyprus have been evaluated regarding their extinction risk. So that should be our second priority.
Great, thank you very much, Ove. We also have questions in the Q&A. So the first one is, how should someone collect ants if they want to post them to you? Do they need to preserve them somehow?
Okay, so that's a very nice question. In the website, actually, you'll find more about this on how to collect ants. There is also a relevant video on how to do this. Ants are typically stored in alcohol. So if you have, I personally use these kinds of vials, but I know that since these won't be readily available for everyone, there's two ways of doing this. First is that if there is some kind of species that is a nuisance to you inside your house and you'd really like to know what it is, it's just to put it in a small container with some kind of alcohol and get in touch with us. The second way is that we have created these small kits with these kinds of vials. And if you are interested, you can send us an email and we'll mail you a kit with instructions on how to collect, vials to collect your samples, and we'll keep you updated as soon as we have identified these species.
Thank you, Jakove. Next question. What is the most interesting fact you got to identify in any of the ants found only in Cyprus in comparison to alien ones?
Could you please repeat? I'm sorry.
What is the most interesting fact you got to identify in any of the ants found only in Cyprus in comparison to alien ones? Maybe here wants to say if there are any interesting differences between native and non-native species.
Okay.
Not quite sure about that.
I'd say that the basic anatomy of an ant is pretty much the same in aliens and natives. In some cases, it's very hard to identify some species because the differences are so subtle. But with alien species, these are most probably easier to identify than natives. Each kind of category, alien or native, have their special adaptations and anatomical differences. For example, to be honest, there is a genus of ants, Temnothorax, or the acorn ants, which nest inside twigs and branches. And we have no alien species of that genus, not at all. Most of them in Cyprus are endemic, and we have found them in specialized locations. And they have these very nice thorns in the back of their thorax. So I'd say that the coolest ants for now are these, and it's really striking to me that why aren't there any aliens in this genus? Do they have so specific requirements that they cannot survive outside their native range?
Thank you, Jakob. The next question is, congratulations for your very clear presentation. What we can do if we find an invasive ant in our house? I think you already answered this question, but if you can please, before we close, if you can please share your website in the Q&A so people can find
Yeah,
your
sure.
website more easily.
I'd like just to add on this question that I know that ants are hard to identify, and by seeing an ant in your house, you won't know if it's alien or native, and this is a problem. What we can do is help you identify this ant, but if, for example, this ant is the little fire ant, I think it would be best for both parties to communicate the Ministry of Environment. The spread and the monitoring of this species is very important. So it would be good to have all available information transferred to the competent authorities so we can tackle this more effectively.
I think the next one is quite nice. Which one is the coolest ant in your opinion?
Okay, so yeah, I love alien ants. And as distractive as it is, for me, the little fire ant, Vasmania auropunctata, is the coolest ant. Not only because of its morphology, because it's such a golden orange color, it also has these cool anatomical features as big thorns, and it has like these insertions in its head where the antenna get folded so that they are protected. And for me, it's marvelous, and how this tiny little ant got to spread and conquer the whole of the world.
Another comment from Bolivia. Thank you, Jakob. Do you work only to identify the invasive species and their distribution in Cyprus? Or do you also work on how to manage them, especially in Natura 2000 areas?
Okay, so for the moment, we're trying to set a baseline for what kind of ants we can find on the island. I haven't got into conservation and management yet, because I firmly believe that we should first have a checklist and all the available info on what species we have and where these are. And I have to say at this point that we wouldn't be able to do this without some colleagues from Greece and Poland working on the taxonomy of ants. They have been really mentoring me and helping me learn more about how to identify ants. The invasive ones are a very strong part of my research interest, but as information gets more abundant, I'd like to move towards the conservation and management part.
Thank you, Jakob. Another question is, do we have endemic ant species? I think this was answered from your presentation.
Yes, we do. There's 17 of them, and I believe there will be much more to come.
By endemic, you mean endemic of Cyprus, not endemic
Of Cyprus, found nowhere else on the world. I'm not talking about species distributed only in the Eastern Mediterranean, on the Middle East. If we account for those, we'd have a higher number. But yes, 17 species only in Cyprus.
Question from Carlos. Thanks for the nice presentation. Who are the main predators of ants in Cyprus?
Ooh. So that's a nice question. That's a question that, to be honest,
there is another
oh,
question, Carlos, that I want to combine. The second question from Carlos is, do you know any association, mutualism of ants with other species? For example, birds in Cyprus. Two questions from Carlos.
These are fantastic questions, and I'm really into ecology and the networks between species. So first of all, about the predators, I'd like to say that although I have not worked with vertebrates, I've seen a few publications regarding birds. And what I see is that in species such as Falco vespertinus, we see that around 90% of their diet consists of flying ants. There is this stage in an ant colony where new queens are produced. These queens have wings, and they will leave their nest to found their own colonies. And when they do, they will live with a large number of males with whom they will reproduce. So that is the time that you will see lots of ants flying in the sky. And that is a party for any bird who eats insects. So we know that many birds eat these insects, and also some reptiles and entomophagous mammals, but I think that the contribution to the birds is much larger. And to answer the part of associations, we have actually built in our website a Google sheet showing all the associations of ants on Cyprus with other native Myrmecophilus species. And in cases where we know of a species but don't know the association, we have also left this blank so to guide future research. These associations include butterflies. There is a subfamily of butterflies that spend a part of their life inside the ant nest. They somehow mimic the scents and pheromones produced by ants, and they get carried into their nest. And after they are ready to transform, they exit the nests as adults before they get eaten. And this is something the endemic butterfly of Cyprus, Sicaritis akamas, does. And we know the association with a chrematogaster ant, but we are not certain of the species. So that would be something that we could establish in the following years.
Thank you, Jakovos. I have to be a bit fast because we passed our time. How is a day in the field? Do you go alone or do you have a team? Question from Olivia.
So I'd say that most of the times I go alone. When I have company, I do enjoy it, but going out to collect ants is not a typical hiking. It takes a lot more time because you have to sit under every rock and check every tree stump to find something interesting. That is something that annoys you if you are going out to walk and not spend your time looking at rocks and trees. Where I get the chance or I get a friend, we go together in the field. We have some other Darwin fellows who we might go around together. But most of the time, yes, I am alone. I wouldn't advise this because it can be dangerous outside in the field. If you do have company, please use it.
One question from Becky. How do you know which ants are alien and which aren't? Is it from previous research? If so, is there any chance no one has found it until now? I think this is the work you do, Jakovos.
Yeah, I'd say that in some cases, you can identify the ant just from its color or from its movement. Like Vasmania auropunctata is a notoriously slow ant. You'll see something small and orange moving very slowly. Most of the times you know that that is Vasmania for sure, but you always have to check all specimens under a stereo microscope. So I wouldn't go out identifying species just from photographs or from observing it outside the field. We always collect material and we check it under a stereoscope. For this, I have identification keys, which have been drafted from our myrmecologists colleagues working mostly on taxonomy. And in some cases, it's hard to know whether you have an alien species. Some species do resemble a lot each other. And for some species, there are no keys available. So you have to check all closely related and try to figure out if you have something new for science or if you have a species which has not been previously found around the world and is native, for example, to Australia or South America. So that's kind of a tricky job. And what we have done in our paper for alien species is that we give a key to distinguish native from alien species. And we have also added alien species that are not yet in Cyprus, but we would expect to find them. So that could help future research. And just to close on that, I think that most alien species have been already on the island for decades. We just didn't look for them.
Yeah. And I would like to add to this, Jakove, maybe sometimes even stereoscopes, like macroscopically or microscopically, you may not be able to identify the species if it's native or non-native. So it may require molecular analysis to extract its DNA and identify the species with other means. And a final question from Kelly: are endemic ants currently threatened?
Ooh. First of all, now that I have the opportunity, I'd like to thank Kelly. Kelly is actually the supervisor of my Darwin Fellowship in Akrotiri, and she has been mentoring and supporting me for the past few years. So a really big thanks to Kelly. And regarding her question, I'd say that we have no data for that yet. There are some species that have such a small distribution that we would expect that they could be threatened. But for that, we need more data. We'll need more research on the habitats and threats of these species in particular. And of course, we'd have to assess the extinction risk of these species under protocols and criteria such as the ones established by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature.
Thank you very much, Jakove. We don't have any more questions. Please, if you can add your website here.
Okay. Here it is.
It's a Google site, yes.
Yeah, it's a Google site. It's paired with an email address where you can send us an email and contact us. And since I have the opportunity, you can browse through it. And if you find something that you think would be of interest that it's not there, we can add it. And if it looks funny to you or we should change something, any suggestion would be helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Jakove, it was very, very interesting.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you everyone for attending.
Hope to see everyone on next week's webinar.